Passion Sunday. I think this message will go pretty well with that. And I know it's been kind of a longer morning with all that we've had this morning and kind of cloudy, but I think my message is a shorter message. That'll probably work out all right. But maybe. We'll see. You never know. But anyway, we're continuing in Philippians, and we're starting here. Last week we were looking at 1 through 6, and I want to pick up and look at 6 and 7 quick. But what I want to talk about today is not being done yet. I have my kids, and I always tell them to clean up, right? I'm like, clean this up. They're like, are we done yet? And I'm like, what are you standing on? They're like, oh. It's like, are we done yet? Are we done yet? No, there's more to be done. There is more to be done. And I think that's kind of what I want to focus on as Christians. Like, in our Christian life, it's like, I think a lot of us are very, I don't know if lazy is the word, but I can tell you it's easy to become lazy. Like, as far as like things that you should be doing for the Lord, things that you should be caring about, things that you should be reaching out, things that you ought to be doing for the people around you, things that you ought to be doing for Christ. And many times we would like to think that, we can kind of stand there as if we're done. And I think what Paul is going to say here is, no, you're not done yet. Keep doing the things that he wants you to continue doing. So we looked at last week in verse 6, it says, I am sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. And he says, it is right for me to feel this way about you. So Paul was talking about how, it's right for me to think that God is going to complete the work that he's doing in you, because when I look at you, he talked about how they joined with him in his imprisonment. He's like, I'm thrown into prison, and you guys are there to help me. You're here to care for me. And he's like, I was preaching the gospel, and you guys stood up to defend it and to stand with me and to make sure the gospel was proclaimed. He's like, you guys became partners with me. He's like, I can see from what you're doing that you guys are on the right track, and I believe from that it is right for me to think about you, that God is going to complete the work that he's doing in you. He's like, I see a lot of good things in you. So I think now he's going to tell them they're not done. They're not done yet. And so in verse 8 he says this. He says, for God is my witness how I yearn for you with the affection of Jesus Christ. He's like, God is my witness that I want more for you. He's like, I care about you so much that it's like I'm aching inside. He's like, and I don't know what more you could say that God is my witness. Like, there's no, for Paul, this would be like, there's no higher level of saying, I can't tell you how important it is for me that these things come about in your life. Like, there is no more important thing. Like, I am aching inside. Like, if you would only develop into what you ought to be. He's like, this is the most important thing that you could do. And, I think Paul's life also makes it clear what matters. Here's Paul, and he's in prison for preaching the gospel. He's facing, he says later that he's waiting on a sentence. He says, I don't know, maybe they're going to kill me, maybe they're not, I don't know, but he could be facing being burned, hung, you name it, whatever it is, he's facing like horrible things, but here he is, and he's just like dying for other people to serve God. He's like, it is so important that people just do what is right. And I think that it shows that, yes, Paul probably is worthy of saying that this is important. He loves so much that it is so important to him that we also develop as well. So Paul says this in verse 9. He says, it is my prayer that your love may abound more and more. He says, with knowledge and discernment. He's like, so we've probably seen this over, hopefully over the years of my preaching. The most everything begins with love. Like, if you don't actually care, then I don't know what you're doing. Like, if it has to do with doing what is right, serving God, serving people, like, obviously you ought to care. You ought to love. You ought to have a compassion for the people around you, right? And then he says that he wants that love to be growing with knowledge and discernment, which he wants you to be like, okay, like, I'm thinking about this, and I'm coming to the right conclusions. Like, I'm becoming smarter and smarter. And I'm like, what ought I do? And he's like, I want your love to grow, and I want you to continue on to be, like, continuing to think about these things, like, apply your brain to what you would do with love, to have, like, this Christ-like mindset. And, again, I think this is very typical of raising children. Like, my kids are starting to get older, and they're getting to the point where I just want so bad for them to have recognition, okay? Like, those dishes don't do themselves, right? Like, must I direct every motivation that comes to you? Because, like, eventually I'm like, okay, you guys know what needs to be done. You know you generally do it. And I'm like, we even have okay, I didn't even mean to throw this in, but we even have a chart at home, okay? And on it I have listed, like, don't love others, love others, what, I don't even remember what all is on it, but it's like, not doing your work, sassing, talking back, whatever it is, and it's just levels of, I want them to be above level 5 if they want to go anywhere. But at the top of this list, even though I've messed up the whole list, at the top of this list says, love others, do your work without being told. Because that is like knowledge. Like, it's like you've taken the knowledge and you've applied it for yourself. You're not doing it because I told you to do it. You're mature in your actions. That you obviously love other people and you're doing it, and I don't have to tell you to do it. It's that your love has abounded with knowledge and discernment. And so now Paul wants for the whole church, he's like, I want knowledge and discernment. I don't want, and like for us, we don't want to look around at our church and be like, man, they don't know what to do. They have no knowledge and discernment. Their love is not going into action. They're obviously not thriving in what they need to be. So he wants them to kind of wake up and analyze what they ought to be. And then he says, I want you to remind you that he says earlier that he says it is right for me to feel this way about you. Like, he's already seen some fruits developing in their life, but now he wants them to continue on. And he says this, he says that my prayers that your love may abound more and more with knowledge and discernment. And I think, this is where I talked about a little bit last week, that sometimes the most simple things, the most simple messages can be lost because everybody's like, yeah, I know, these are the simple things that we ought to be doing. But I think so many times these are these like, to Paul, these are like these dying, like crazy important things that are just simplistic. Like, if you would love so much as to reach out and care about the people around you. If you would love so much that you would look around and you'd be like, there's a need, let me meet it. There's a need, let me meet it. And he wants us to develop into this. And, I think, many times this means several things. And once again, why I keep looking down is I've totally lost my notes. I am nowhere in this message. And I keep throwing in stuff that's not in here. I don't know why that happened, but we might be done really early. But anyway, you guys can understand that this knowledge and discernment can develop into several things. It can develop into how you spend your time, because we're going to look at our time, we're going to run an analysis. We're going to be like, what do I do with my life? Is it focused on me? Is it self-centered? Is it focused on like all the things I want to do? I have planned my life and my day around all of the things that are important to me, and there's no time left for all of the things that Paul would say that is abounding with love, that is this knowledge and discernment that you are figuring out, okay, if I was standing before Christ and discerning what he would want me to be doing here, am I doing any of those things? And this also may come into even financial things, like how am I spending what God has given me? Am I allotting it for myself in a selfish way, or am I allotting it in a way that would be reaching out and caring and meeting the needs? Paul has talked about in the earlier passages how, here he is in prison, and they're the ones who are sending care. They're the ones who are concerned about him. They're the ones that are doing, and he's congratulating them on him. But he's like, I want to see you just continue down that road. He's like, I don't want you to be like, well, we started good, and now let's stop. He wants them to continue on. And he says this, he says, with knowledge and discernment, in verse 10, he says, so that you may approve what is excellent. And I don't think he means like you're going to sit here and be like, okay, let me take a little analysis of my life. I think those are all good things. I think what he means is, so that when you have this, when you've done your analysis, and then you approve what is excellent, I think what he means is, then you do what is excellent. Like, you don't just say, well, that is, I approve of it. I think what he means is that your knowledge would come about, that you would analyze your world, and then you would approve, that you would be like, this is what I approve, so this is what I'll do. I will do these things because I approve of what is right. And he says that you may approve of what is excellent, so that you may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ. And I think, this is, again, something that maybe we've become callous to. And maybe we're like, well, that day may or may not come, in my lifetime. Many have died before me, but the Lord will return. And that is an extreme thought. Like, it's like the boss is coming home. Like, not that it makes a difference. If you die, you'll still meet him. But he's like, you want to be pure and blameless for the day of Christ. You want to, when he appears, you want to be like, yeah, I was doing what I was supposed to do, right? I had taken an analysis of my life, and I looked at it, and I was like, these are the things that are good, these are the things that are right, and I applied myself to the things that were right, so that when the Lord came, here I was, living pure and blameless before God. I was like, I was doing what I ought to do and living the way that I ought to live. And, I think, and I'm trying to bring this to a close here, and I think this is a pretty quick message. But anyway, as we're closing this out, we've all had coworkers, right? Most of us, a lot of us. And a lot of times we look at these coworkers and we think to ourselves, well, what is wrong with you? And first off, many times you're like, they need knowledge, right? They need knowledge and discernment, right? Because you're like, how do they even have this job? Like they have no business doing this job, okay? So first off, there's knowledge and discernment, but then there's even a more painful one on top of that, okay? In my mind, I think there's a more painful one, and that is those who have knowledge and discernment without application. You're like, what is wrong with these people? Because they have knowledge, they have discernment, yet they like to sit there. And it's like you must just plan on finding a new job when this one ends, because you do not apply your knowledge and discernment. Like Paul is saying to these people, listen, you need to apply what you've learned. You need to apply, you need to look out and you need to have compassion. You need to have care, and I think you need to evaluate. And you need to be like, okay, if to do what is loving, you know what Jesus said when Jesus was speaking and he was trying to put this into terms. He said, I was hungry and you fed me. He says, I was naked and you clothed me. He says, I was a stranger and you visited me. He says, I was sick and you came to me. He says, I was in prison and you came to me. And he says, you did the things that you ought to have done. And I think this is where I'm kind of going with this is many of us sit here and we are that employee in a Christian standpoint. We are that employee in the church. We are that one who has the knowledge. Maybe now they have the discernment, but we don't have the application. We're just that person who just knows there's a lot of things that if I sat and I just asked myself, what would Jesus Christ want me to do in regards to his kingdom? That I would bubble up with this love that would be like, okay, I'm going to analyze. This is the knowledge I ought to have. This is the discernment I ought to have. So therefore, apply myself. But many of us, I think many times it's just so easy for us to not apply ourselves. We're just that guy, right? And I think it's just so important. And I think of the things that Paul is bringing up in this. And, he's just talking about how, listen, you're partners with me. And this is what he says to the church of Philippi. He's like, you've been partner to me. He's like, the gospel. He's like, what I preached, you've carried. He says, when I was attacked, you came to my side. When I was in prison, you were there. You guys are partners in the gospel. And he says, you defended it, you proclaimed it, you affirmed it. You are actively doing what needs to be done. And I think that's what now, I am drawing this to a close. I'm trying to right now. But anyway, what I'm saying is that he's saying they've done good. But I think what he's saying is they're not done. It's not like, oh, okay, well, we've come to the end of this situation. He's like, I hope this just goes on and on, that you live to be that person who does, who is, who actually considers. And I think a lot of us, if we really considered, we would find certain guilt levels in our mind. I mean, I don't want to put it that way. I don't want to put it in the way of guilt. But I would say that we have things that we know we should be reaching out in aspects of our life, but instead we've not put application to our knowledge. We've not taken that compassion and done the things that we ought to do. So I just hope that this is an encouragement to us in some of the most simple things of life to just make sure you're analyzing, and after you've analyzed, you've achieved the knowledge of what you ought to do, and then you approve of it and apply yourself to it, that you would do the things that you ought to do. So I just hope that that's just something, I hope that that will stay on our minds, and I hope that even as we look at this for maybe several months, that it's just going to develop into a thing where we begin to do more and more. So I just really want us to commit to doing more and more, that we're going to grow as we go through this book. So I hope we're seeing change as we go through this. So let's go ahead and close in a word of prayer this morning. Our God and Father, I just pray that you would just be with us, and I just pray that you just help us. Sometimes some of the simple things are the things that get lost, Lord. Sometimes we just realize that our time becomes self-centered, and we haven't really realized that, but just help us to reach out and to care. Help it to come from a heart of love. Help us to just to continue to try to push the gospel forward in our area, that people would have the most important thing, that they would know Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior, and that we would affirm that to them, that we would have at least the heart to do that, and then after that, that we would have a care and compassion for the people around us who have needs and things that we could meet, or a friendship we could be. And I just pray that you just help us to do those things, Lord, and I just pray that you'd just be with us and help us to grow in those ways, Lord, and I pray this in your Son's name. Amen.